Anyway, so here we have the second iteration of the Crux Cast takeover. So the last one really went well. I've got a fresh panel with me today. So with me, I've got Biggar, who's the inclusion and wellbeing consultant capability for the capability engagement team at Edinburgh and Napier University. Claire's got a keen interest in supporting and encouraging those from the armed forces community to consider education as a viable option during and after service. She's been working with this remit for about 4 years now, collaborating with key bodies, and her aim is for all the Scottish universities and colleges to be consistent in their messaging across the armed forces community. She's also co-chair of the Higher Education and Further Education Veterans Network, which includes all the Scottish universities and 85% of the colleges. They campaign to ensure that education is seen as an opportunity and a driver to help current and ex-service personnel reach a positive destination after service. I've also got Gerri Cavanagh, who's the head of partnerships and communication at the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework Partnership. Now, Julie's head of partnerships and communication. She previously worked in the Lifelong Learning Directorate at the Scottish Government, and before this in both English and Scottish education systems. A 10-year span in sales and marketing in the private sector also gave her some valuable skills that she uses on a daily basis. Her main responsibility with the SCQF partnership has been to raise awareness and engagement with the framework, which has been achieved through partnership working and through a range of joint projects. And Julie oversees all marketing and development of tools and resources to further aid and understand the understanding and engagement within the framework. And finally, we have Shaun, who's a support officer for Veterans Scotland. So Shaun served with the British Army for 12 years, initially with the 1st Battalion Black Watch, then moved on to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, then served in Northern Ireland for 7 years with the Royal Irish Regiment. And Shaun left the Army in 2017, completed a BSc in sports coaching, and worked for the Scottish Sports Futures, which was a charity. In 2015, however, he took up the post of support officer for Veterans Scotland. So his primary focus nowadays is to promote employability of veterans and assist them to assess or access employment and training across Scotland. And finally, we've got Gerri Matthews-Smith, who was with me on the previous debate. So she's the Associate Research Professor and Lead for the Military Research at Edinburgh Napier University. She's also the Principal Investigator on the Military Transition Research Project, and also owe Gerri a big thank you for putting this panel together. So Gerri, thank you, and panel, welcome. So the objective of today really is to provide, it's not really a debate as we advertised in the first instance, but it's more of an information session. So the objective is really to give insight into the educational landscape in Scotland and give some recent developments on that to everybody who's listening. Is to inform everybody about the Scottish Qualifications Framework, and is to communicate options and support available to serving personnel and veterans. So as I say, rather than a debate, it's more of an information session with a bit of discussion around the edges. After this, if there's any questions, please drop them in the comments and we'll respond accordingly. So with that in mind, and I've done plenty of talking here, so I'll take a drink in a second. So first of all, Claire, can I ask you to outline the current form and structure of the education system in Scotland in the context of higher and further education?
Okay. Yep, thanks, Matt. So if we first look at the Scottish education offering, with 19 Scottish universities and 25 colleges, there are a range of courses on offer. Some universities offer the same types of courses, but taught in different formats. So, for example, modern universities such as Edinburgh Napier, Glasgow Caledonian, Robert Gordon universities have quite vocational offerings, while the ancient universities such as University of Edinburgh, University of Glasgow, Aberdeen, etc., will teach more traditional, teach in a more traditional manner. Edinburgh Napier, for example, offers 150 undergraduate degree programmes and dozens of postgraduate options covering a range of programmes across 6 schools. Other Scottish universities adopt a similar style of school or faculty model, and there is certainly no shortage or varied programmes on offer, and Scotland has a strong reputation globally for HE delivery. Routes into university study depend on qualifications and particular degree programme entry requirements, and these vary across the universities. Students can apply straight from secondary school through UCAS, which is the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service, which tend to be the normal route. This route is of course welcome to adult returners to education and is a route that the Armed Forces community can use too. Not everyone starts an undergraduate degree at university directly from school, and many enter through the articulation route, which means they have completed a higher national certificate or a higher national diploma at college. Articulation means that some students with an HNC can enter directly into second year of a degree programme, and those with an HND straight into second or third year, depending on their circumstances. Universities partner up with colleges in their local areas on articulation pathways. So, for example, Edinburgh Napier admits over 700 students from college each year. Importantly, approximately 70% of college entrants receive full credit for their qualifications advanced standing entry. Many Armed Forces veterans start their studies at college, and we receive many through Edinburgh College and West Lothian College. Students can also apply directly to their chosen university, but UCAS tend to have the monopoly on university places. The reason for explaining all of this is to highlight that there is really no barriers for the Armed Forces community when considering education. They are treated the same as any adult returner to education. Interestingly, our statistics at Edinburgh Napier have highlighted that the average age of an Edinburgh Napier ex-forces student is 29.4 years of age. The Armed Forces community in Scotland is ideally placed to access training and education opportunities for a second career after they leave service, and indeed they can study while in service, as many universities offer flexible approach to study depending on the course. We really do need to break down the myth of studying university, especially for those who may have left with limited qualifications or have a poor experience of school. There is still the misconception that university is for brain boxes or for those of the higher ranks, and that's just not true. University can be an option at any age and stage in life. Yep, there is a need to have certain level of qualifications to study at undergraduate level, but these qualifications, if not gained at school, can be gained during college or through prior learning through time spent in service. In Scotland, the SCQF are involved in a project to map qualifications while in service and map them to Civilian Street to use them to gain access to HE, FE or employment. Julie will talk further about the project to map the qualifications, as it really is a valuable piece of work. Over the last 3 to 4 years, Scotland has been proactive in its support to the Armed Forces community and encouraging them to consider education as a viable option after and during service. We are lucky in Scotland to have the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, who is appointed by the Scottish Government to provide them with an impartial advice on the support provided to veterans and their families in Scotland. The previous Scottish Veterans Commissioner produced 4 reports: Transition, Housing, Employability and Skills, and Health and Wellbeing. And the current Commissioner has produced an impact report on all the recommendations from all 4 reports. The current objective of the Scottish Veterans Commissioner is around the Positive Future Report, Getting Transition Right in Scotland. And it's good to see transition is at the forefront of thinking, and we believe that education has a strong part to play in positive transition. From the Scottish Veterans Commissioner report entitled The Veterans Community, Employability, Skills and Learning, there were recommendations given to a number of organisations within the HE-FE sector. These organisations, such as the Scottish Funding Council and the Scottish Credit Qualifications Framework, set up working groups to fulfil the recommendations. Edinburgh Napier University, Glasgow Caledonian University and representatives from the college network sit and contribute to the engagement to complete these initiatives. The Scottish Government wishes Scotland to be the destination of choice for service leavers and their families, and we believe that the HE-FE sector can help to achieve this. The Scottish HE sector is already working closely, but there is so much more that we can do to encourage positive change. Over the last 3 years, we've worked hard to bring the Scottish HE and FE sector together. We have set up the HE, which is also the Higher Education and Further Education Veterans Champion Network, ensuring there's a representative from each Scottish university and a majority of the colleges on the network. The aim of the network is to allow us all to work together to explore opportunities. Through the network, we've encouraged all Scottish universities to A, sign up to the Armed Forces Corporate Covenant, and B, introduce internal networks. As part of the support provided by the network, we provided a toolkit to support the universities in their task, to promote consistent messaging and to help set up armed forces networks within their institutions, like the network that we've established at Edinburgh Napier and also at Glasgow Caledonian University. We've worked closely and continue to work closely with TESRA, which is the Training Education Skills Recruiting and Resettling Department in the MOD, to review and improve the system for both service personnel user and the service provider for the LCAS process. We continue to work closely with CTP to ensure education is promoted as a viable option in line with employment opportunities. And we know that the ex-service personnel are well equipped to do very well at university. They're dedicated, consistent, meet deadlines and engaged. However, we do know that they can sometimes struggle with the transition from service life to academic life. These are two very different environments. There needs to be a bit more done within the universities to help support our armed forces community settle into academic life. And this will be a focus for the HE-FE network as we move forward. Universities pride themselves on being inclusive, and we really are keen to promote this to the armed forces community, as university can help them reach their positive destination after service. And that's me, Matt.
So basically summarising that, and jump in anybody where you like, there's many routes. There's a load of different routes into education, and it's open to all, it's open to everybody. It's not elitist or anything like that. It's open to people who have the aptitude to study, and we help. There's methods there to help people get on the right course and find the right course. And there's a lot of work going on within Scotland to encourage people to settle in Scotland. I think we're going to come on to that a little bit later, aren't we? The Scottish Government is trying to encourage veterans to settle in Scotland, and there are mechanisms in place to encourage the people that settle in Scotland can get onto access to education.
Yeah, that's basically it. And
so
you hit the nail on the head there when you said that, university is, it is open to all, but there is just there's still this myth around there, especially we find from those in the armed forces community, that there is this phrase that they just don't believe that university is for them. And that is the bit that we're keen to break down, that it is. And that's why I started off kind of detailing the standard university environment in Scotland, because it is no different really for anyone wanting to study. It's just this breaking the myth down.
That's really important from my perspective. My granddad was a farm worker and then a welder. My other grandfather was a painter and decorator, and my dad was an electrician. So it's not as if we're coming. Anyone who studies has to come from upper class or middle class or anywhere like that. It's about the aptitude, the educational aptitude, and applying themselves. Just with that in mind, does anybody want to jump in there before I just segue into Julie? Yeah.
Just want to say, sorry, I just wanted to say that Edinburgh Napier University prides itself on the fact, and that point that you've actually made, Matt, is that a lot of their graduates coming through are first-time graduates. And for their family, it's wonderful. Our graduations are the best celebration you ever can imagine, because it really is, a celebration for the family. So it demonstrates the change that so many of our students are coming through that way and are being encouraged by parents to do that. It's just a.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julie, some of the work you're doing actually looks at mapping experiences in the armed forces across to educational and civilian equivalents. Could you just elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So our work started around about 2018, just after the report that Claire was talking about from the Veterans Commissioner for Scotland. So looking at, you know, how we support veterans going forward to into jobs or into further learning as well. So it was a piece of work that it was felt was really important. So the SCQF is the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, and it's Scotland's lifelong learning framework, and it allows people to make choices in their learning journey, progress through their learning journey, and think about what they want to do in terms of their choices moving forward. So it helps people to understand qualifications as well, whether that be educational institutions like universities or colleges, but also employers in Scotland. So the qualification system that's used by the MOD is very much based on the English system. Of course, in Scotland, we have a different education system. And so we've been looking at how we map the qualifications that have been gained in the armed forces across to the SCQF, so that people can understand the level of the learning that they've gained whilst in service, and then articulate that or explain that more clearly to either an institution or an employer. So that work's been progressing, and we've looked at a number of different CAT badges. We started primarily with the Army because they have the largest number of qualifications. So we started with the Army, and we've created our own bespoke web page on the SCQF website, which is scqf.org.uk. And under support, there is a page specifically for veterans. And what we developed was a number of different PDF leaflets for different CAT badges. That's proved very helpful. We've had quite a number of inquiries from service leavers to understand better what they've gained and to help them, particularly with qualifications that might be older as well. So there's that to bear in mind. We have to think about qualifications that somebody might have undertaken that now perhaps aren't offered, but still have a relevance, particularly if they want to move towards further learning or, you know, higher education institution. So it's really important that they know what they've gained, so they can explain that if they're making an application to a higher education institution. So that work has now progressed. What we were finding throughout the project was that a number of individuals find it quite difficult to explain the skills that they've gained whilst in service clearly to either institutions or employers. And so what we're looking at doing now is bringing something online, and we have a project that's been funded by Scottish Government that allows us to look at up to 25 job roles across all three armed forces and bring those online. So what we're looking at doing is taking the skills that have been gained, think about the skills that somebody will have actually gained in a particular job role, and then put those into a database really of information. So it's almost like a skills identification tool, and that will be hosted by Skills Development Scotland, who are the organisation, the all-age careers information, advice and guidance organisation for Scotland. And they have a very good website called My World of Work, and this will be hosted on My World of Work. And alongside the skills identification tool will be built a qualifications identification tool as well. So the associated qualifications for that particular job role will be available alongside. Someone can put a qualification in, and then it should give it an SCQF level as well as an English level. So they'll see the two levels. And the idea behind this, or the aim of this, is to really help people, everybody, understand the sorts of skills that somebody gains when in particular job roles within the armed forces, and how those can be transferable. How can they be used, either contributing towards recognition of prior learning to make a claim for articulation, which is what Claire was talking about. So meaning that you don't have to repeat your learning unnecessarily. If you've already undertaken learning, then you can make a claim for what's called recognition of prior learning. And that's what Claire was saying, where sometimes you can move into the second or third year of a degree course because you've already got either relevant qualifications or experience that contribute to that. Or it may be that people are looking for a job as well. So obviously there'll be a variety of different people. But again, what Claire's saying is, you know, people don't realise how much they've gained in terms of skills and experience when they're in the armed forces, and how much those are valued by civilian, you know, within civilian life, but perhaps not always realised. And that's where we're trying to help people to explain those more clearly.
So I'm guessing not everybody ends up going on a humanitarian mission to a war-torn country and having to take charge of a situation and organise an evacuation to you know, a project to evacuate people out. So I'm guessing there's difficulty in actually putting that in a context of civilian life that people could recognise.
Difficult sometimes for those individuals, what's maybe classed as non-trades, maybe infantry, for instance, who are out there in the front line. I think if you're an engineer or you're a chef, you know, then you know better what your skills are, and people understand those better in civilian life. But there are so many other skills that so many people have in the armed forces or leaving the armed forces that we need in civilian life, but don't necessarily fully understand. And that's what we're looking to try and help and support.
Absolutely. Anything else anybody wants to add on that? So there's only 25 that you're looking at the moment. Is the scope to expand that?
Yeah, so initially we're looking at 25, and we had aimed to look at that over this year, this year from 1st of March through to the end of, 1st of April through to the end of March 2022. We're doing this in conjunction with Scottish Government, Skills Development Scotland and the MOD. So what we would like to do is see what, you know, once we've undertaken that piece of work and tested it, what we then want to do is probably move on from that. But obviously it's down to our partners as well to say, absolutely, you know, we could go forward and do some more of that, or it might tie in with some other work that's going on at the moment around skills identification in the armed forces. So we'll see how that ties in, and we're just in the early stages of the project, so we have meetings coming up this week to talk about that tie-in with some of the work that's already going on with within the MOD. So we would hope that we could take on more job roles and bring things online to, you know, in a simplistic way that allows somebody to just go in, put in their skills or put in their job role and look at the associated skills. So then they can use that either, you know, within moving forward within further learning, or maybe for a job as well.
Yes, that's something I didn't actually realise until you mentioned it today. That I know today's we're focusing on education, but SCQF also helps people with job placements.
And I think it's just it helps with skills identification for that next step, I think is probably the best way of putting it. So it's thinking about how you identify your skills or articulate your skills for your next step in your learning journey. I think that would probably be the best way of saying it. So we're very much what they call the sat-nav system for Scotland in terms of the learner journey. So it's thinking about, and everybody's learner journey is different and everybody's individual. So it's what you want to do next. And it's making sense of that and understanding what your choices are. That's what the SCQF does and helps people with.
And how big is SCQF?
We're really small. We have a huge remit because we work right across Scotland, and we've done a lot of international work, so the framework's renowned across the world. And there's probably full-time equivalents, about 9 of us, and that includes our admin support, and it includes financial, somebody running the finances for us, and our chief exec. So, you know, we're a small team with a big remit. But the framework itself is a framework of probably in excess of 13,500 qualifications. So it's You know, there's a lot of learning on the actual framework. There's obviously all the mainstream Scottish qualifications that we would all know, like nationals and hires, HNCs, HNDs, and then degrees, of course, and masters. So they're all on the framework. But there's also probably in excess of around 900 to 1,000 qualifications owned by different organisations, like the NHS or organisations like Shell. So and you know, the third sector as well, some voluntary organisations have got qualifications on there. There's a huge range of other people who own qualifications and have chosen to have them recognised on the SCQF for different reasons.
So not many people, but a massive remit, and busy. So I think busy is probably one of the biggest words in your vocabulary.
Yeah, we're quite busy. Yeah.
Matt, can I come in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to jump onto you, so please jump in. Yeah.
Just one on the work that Julie's referred to there. I don't think the scale of that work can be underestimated, or the need for that work. As you've alluded to there, every time a serving member of the British Forces deploys either on operations or an exercise anywhere in the world or in the UK, they are picking up what many people refer to as informal skills and experience, whether that be, as you say, you know, working out the logistics of getting from A to B with the equipment you need, or indeed speaking with local population and trying to help them out. All of these skills need to be captured. And at the moment, it's kind of expected that the individual does that as a matter of course. And I think that the work that Julie and the team are doing is actually helping the serving population understand that if they capture them now, it will benefit them when they do make that decision to move on. So again, I just wanted to reiterate the scale of that work. I don't think can be underestimated.
Absolutely, because I mean, when as we use deploying on an overseas mission, but you don't know what skills you're going to apply until you actually get there. So these people have got a very, very wide range of skills that can, you know, used to hitting the ground running and being very resourceful. So
it's also the things like, for example, if you're going to Kenya, as most soldiers will do at some stage, you get training in terms of, you know, preparing yourself to go to Kenya. You get the little handbook that tells you about the local population, key phrases, key words. And then all of a sudden, as an 18-year-old soldier, as I was, there I am sitting in a, you know, hotel in Kenya, speaking, trying to interact with the local population. You know, my peer group back home weren't doing that. But again, it's how do you capture that experience and how do you learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point, and one I think we sort of made that point in the previous cast, but it's something that runs, you know, it runs through and through. I mean, so whilst I've got you, Shaun, could you just give a bit of an overview? You've had quite an interesting experience. You had an interesting transition, and now you work for Veterans Scotland, trying to help place people and give veterans the support they need in terms of education and job placement.
Yeah, so my current job with Veterans Scotland, Veterans Scotland acts as an umbrella organisation. I think currently we have over 85 member organisations, which range from old regimental associations right through to, you know, Poppy Scotland and Erskine. And we're there to provide two sort of roles. One is to support them and represent their interests, either to Scottish Government or indeed UK Government, as and when required. And the key one, the part that I'm really involved in, is to increase collaborative approaches and cooperation amongst the members to make sure that the armed forces community, which doesn't just refer to veterans, it refers to those still serving and their families, receive the best support available at the time that they need it the most. So that's what we're there to do. And as I say, we work with our members on that. My role sits within support and employment. And yeah, as you alluded to, I myself, when I left, made the decision to try and get into university. And I was rejected at the first application for not having any leadership skills. And I was actually told when I phoned for some feedback that had I completed Duke of Edinburgh, it would have given me the necessary tick in the box. And I was quite shocked at that stage to find out that the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst didn't rate as high up as the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. But again, it wasn't personal. It was just a lack of understanding. So I went through the.
Did you go any camps?
So, any camps? No, never did it once. But I went the route that Claire alluded to at the beginning, college. Applied to a local college, did a one-year course, and then that gave me an opportunity to have an interview at the university of my choice. And through that interview, I was lucky enough to talk my way into a third year of a degree course, which had its own pitfalls, steep learning curve, having never written a university essay before, and suddenly being hit with Harvard referencing skills. But again, you pick that up, and this is part of what the HEFE network is there to do now, is to provide that level of support for those that are in the education establishments and to help them navigate their way through there. So yeah, I think that the role of education, I think, has been proven that it's an established pathway to more sustained and better employment opportunities. But the biggest barrier that I've seen is that not always do we manage to get our experience across, and it's not always consistently recognised. And that's the work that Julie's working on, Claire and her team are working on, and hopefully we will see more of the armed forces community think about routes into education and the benefits it offers.
I think there's an interesting comment there when we discussed the Duke of Edinburgh scheme. And the Duke of Edinburgh scheme is a fantastic scheme, and I love it. My eldest daughter's going through it at the moment, but it shows a need, as Claire mentioned earlier on, the need to recognise these skills, because the traditional recognition is you've done Duke of Edinburgh as a leadership, but they're not recognising service. I mean, for example, when I was in the Air Cadets, I did the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and I left the Air Cadets before I'd finished it, but the school wouldn't let me jump on the next level up because I was already ahead of the school. They made me wait. So people don't sort of recognise these sort of things, and I think it's it's a very important point you make, and this links in with the mapping is the skills that you've gained on the in service far outweigh that on the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, which is an absolutely fantastic scheme in my mind anyway. But there's that mapping, there's that disconnect that people can't make that logical transition from one to the other.
Yeah, it's that education piece, and that's all it is. It's just an understanding, and again, if you're dealing with hundreds of applications and you're trained or instinctively looking out for the key buzzwords, Duke of Edinburgh Award or whatever it is, you're not necessarily going to understand what RMAS stands for. And likewise, had I had the advice beforehand, maybe I would have phrased it in a different way or highlighted that experience in a different way. So that's the work that the HEFE network are doing through Claire and colleagues at Glasgow Caledonian University. And I think it's fantastic. I want to see more members of the armed forces community think about university and college when they come out. Again, if Scotland is to be the destination of choice for service leavers, we have to remind them that their education is free, and that there's support networks out there that can help them with the cost of living or whatever they see as the barrier to going into education.
That's a really interesting point. Education in Scotland is free, and that really brings me on to Gerri. On leaving service life, many people will be considered as mature students.
I was going to say, I think that's very true, and not many people know that. And I think that what a lot of us are saying here today is it's not necessarily that people don't understand the skills, but that the people transitioning themselves really don't understand the value of their currency, what they're bringing out with them. They've got so much to offer. And they don't believe that, and I think that there is that kind of bit that they need to be empowered to believe that as they transition through, that maybe is also a focus of some of the work that should go on. But you're right, what a lot of people don't realise, and I've spoken to many people who've gone back to do O levels or whatever, not realising that at the age of 25 you're considered a mature student. And as a mature student, you don't necessarily need the same qualifications to come in. And for many people, I've had students who've come in, done 1 unit on a master's, and they've tried it. And if they get through that, that's their entry criteria onto that master's programme. Which sometimes, again, is a time issue, or is around about a time issue, in terms of how much time people have to give over to this. Because each of the pathways, and there are many of them, are right for people or are wrong for people, depending on where they're coming on. And because people are transitioning at so many different phases out of the forces, you know, it's very, very difficult to know where they actually fit. I mean, I think it was Claire, or maybe it was Judy, who mentioned about officers coming out versus, you know, people maybe who aren't at that rank coming out, and how they might, you know, have more qualifications or whatever. But mature students, you know, are very welcome, and we've had a number of people from the forces come through on that pathway who have done exceptionally well. But the other thing I wanted to pick up on, and Shaun, you alluded to it, and so I'm going to pick on you, and that is, nobody knows how to write an essay when they come to university first. Nobody. Why would you come? I mean, you know, it would be great if you could look to the end and say, well, at the end of 3 years, I know it all. You don't. It is a challenge. It's meant to be a challenge. It's meant to make you work. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of folk who think, you know, that there are people who come in who magically know how to do that. They don't. They learn as they go through the process. And that's really important. But there is another important point that universities picked up on over the last, I'd say, probably over the last 10 years, there's been much more evidence of it, which is a recognition that for some people, dyslexia or some kind of learning problem is an issue. Now, if you hated school and you left school early, it could have been because of that, not because you weren't able, because that's not what this is about, but actually because you struggled with a certain type of learning. And there are support systems which are now there to actually help people through courses, to degree courses, master's courses, right up to doctoral courses, which means that you will get the support you need to actually be able to do the work. And that kind of might sound like, oh, I don't think so. But actually, once people have been in and have been assessed and have actually been given the support that they require, they have absolutely blossomed their way through the rest of the programme, because their confidence in their own ability is increased due to the fact that they realise it's not that they are stupid, which is how they have classified themselves, because many people classify themselves in that way. It's because they've had a struggle with a certain type of learning that they can be helped to get, that they can help to get over, or help certainly to deal with. And I really wanted to stress that, particularly for maybe for people who left school early and thought, I never want to go back there for the rest of my days. And in terms of age, which was something else that was raised by people, our oldest graduate was 78, and he did his doctorate at the age of 75. So nobody is too old. Nobody is too old. Education.
Our neighbour.
Uh-huh.
Our neighbour is 84 and she's doing her PhD at the moment.
It's brilliant. It's a new life. It's, you know, it's like, you know, nobody is too old to get involved in this. Nobody.
I mean, people are transfixed on traditional pathways. Thou shalt go to school, thou shalt get highers, thou shalt get advanced highers, thou shalt go to university. It doesn't really work like that anymore. Both my degrees were taken as a mature student. Shaun's degree was taken as a mature student. So, and it opens up pathways. If I hadn't have gone to university, I would have been running a windsurfing shop for the rest of my life, rather than you know, sort of going and spending 2 years in Korea, surveying ships for 14 years, going, you know, sort of going up into positions that I never would have dreamed of doing had I not gone to university. And Shaun, you're probably the same.
Yeah, Matt, and I think what Gerri is saying is reiterating the work that Claire and the HEFE network is doing, is that when I first turned up at university day one, it was probably one of the most intimidating events I think I'd ever been to, because I didn't know anyone. I wasn't sure how I'd fit in. you know, the core group they were in year 3 of a degree that they've all been through, so they'd been together for 3 years. But the biggest thing was how quickly you get accepted, and when you learn from them, you gain so much more, and obviously you bring your own skills and experience that can help them, and that's the beauty of university and colleges, I think, is that it really helps with that transition piece. It offers a soft transition from, if like me, you've done 12 years or more in the military and then suddenly think, how am I going to cope in civilian world? It offered that opportunity to sort of find where I sit in terms of the civilian landscape. But yeah, I recommend university hands down.
I think if people leaving the armed forces can articulate those experiences properly, they can, as we've already discussed, they can get access not only onto the first year, but on the second or even the third year course of a degree course. So it's not literally in right at the start. Those experiences, if we articulate them correctly, can work for us.
And Matt, that's the key thing though, because they don't need to think of it as it's 4 years out of work. Mm-hmm. Because as you say, it could be 1 year, it could be 2 years part-time. There's so many different routes through the education landscape. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Claire's going to go into that.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to pick up, I know I've said it quite a few times, but it's breaking down these myths and these barriers into it. And I think there needs to be a little bit more done within the MOD itself to explain education as a viable option, and through the partners such as CTP, for example, need to be explaining the articulation route, because that is a barrier. We keep hearing the same things. Funding is a huge barrier as well, but when you sit down and explain, that we're lucky in Scotland that the education, depending on where you were born and signed up, etc., but education is free for the 4 years. And if you left school and went straight into military service and then did 10 years of military service, for example, then you can come out and you're still entitled to use your SAS funding. And quite a few people that we've spoken to, quite a lot, are like, oh right, so I thought you just had that straight after school. You're like, no, so your 84-year-old next door neighbour, if they've never used their SAS funding, can use their SAS funding to study. So we do quite a lot of ambition raising and myth busting sessions, and just to highlight as well that in the years I've been doing this, I've had the pleasure of being invited to many events, networking events, military networking events, and I went to one a couple of years ago and got speaking to a group of army guys who were going through the transition process, and they were quite lower ranks of the military. And I'd said, oh, what are you going to do when you're leaving service? And they said, oh, I don't really have a clue. We'll probably go into labouring or such like, and absolutely nothing wrong with labouring at all. And I said, oh, have you ever considered university or college? And one said to me, no, I am too thick. And one said to me, nobody in my family went to uni. We aren't posh. And it's like, so I then spent about 15 minutes trying to highlight the benefits of coming to university and everything I've just described on here. And then there was quite a few, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, right, I didn't know that. And especially the articulation route as well, as Shaun has said, and I said at the start, it takes away that, you think it's going to be 4 years of your life. And actually, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So there has to be a lot that we have to do as an HE sector, but I do believe that the MOD is going to have to stump up and start kind of singing the same hymn sheet as us as well, and not always push into but encourage into the employment routes, because it's not always the most viable route to lead to a positive destination.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other myth to get rid of is that people say, oh, I've got skills, but I've got no education and I couldn't go into education. And I have a real thing about this, because in order to be able to do the skill, you have to have the underpinning knowledge and education to do it. So in order to be able to carry out the task, you need to know what, the underpinning bits that go with that. So it's wrong just to think of people in terms of just skills, but you need to think of it in skills and knowledge, because it's a combined package. I don't think it's just one. I think it comes together. And I also believe that in terms of leadership, and Shaun, I just about cringed when you said that you were asked about that. We bring people in, and Claire can talk about this more than I can, to actually talk to our students from the army about leadership, because they are considered to be the key leaders. Who's managing the COVID crisis at the moment? It's the army. They're the leaders. They're the ones who do that. So to say to somebody that they haven't got leadership skills, it shows a certain amount of lack of understanding about the abilities that these people bring to the table. So I think knowledge and skills, or skills and educated, both should come together, not just skills. If you say somebody is skilled, you give one impression. If you say somebody is educated, you give a different one. And I think we need to be careful about the words that we actually use there.
Absolutely. And anybody else? I'm going to summarise a minute, because believe it or not, we are nearly at an hour. That's gone like a rocket. Has anybody got anything else that they want to add or summarise your element of before I run into a little bit of a summary? No, but it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's a lot of information there, but summarising, there are processes in place in Scotland for making, for residents that are in Scotland, for veterans that are resident in Scotland. Education isn't a privilege, it's a right. And veterans should not be penalised for serving their country and developing in parallel, because what they're doing is they're developing in parallel to a civilian norm. So recognition of those experiences is underway in terms of Julie's mapping project, for consideration of equivalent skills that we've gained throughout, so service personnel have gained throughout their military experience. So this is being mapped into higher education and further education courses, and it leaves the service personnel to be able to excel in civilian life as they have done in service life. So I'm hoping that we can get this message out to everybody, and that they can get in touch with people. They can. I mean, is it the universities that we get in touch with, or how do we contact people? How do we get hold of people?
So each university has a dedicated armed forces lead, and if you're ex-service, then you can get a list of the armed forces leads from the Veterans Scotland website. I think it's listed on there, isn't it, Shaun? And yes. if you are currently in service, then you can get in touch with any of the universities, the Scottish universities, and they will be able to point you to, well, they should all know who their armed forces lead is. I'm certainly a well-known name within Edinburgh and Napier University as being our armed forces lead, and also the Scottish Funding Council has a list of they've got a dedicated page to support the armed forces community, and it's got the up-to-date list as well of the armed forces leads. But equally, I hold that list and I update it. So I am anyone listening to this who wants some more information on it, then you're more than welcome to contact me on C.
My message to everybody is if you considering education, then contact these people. If you're not considering education, then consider it, because it could change your life moving forward. So I'll finish off by thanking everybody. And so thank you, Gerri, thank you, Julie, Claire and Shaun for your time, and please answer any questions or ask any questions in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you very much.